You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and on this episode, we continue our conversation about John Carpenter's 1988 sci-fi action thriller, They Live. Here we go. You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Bernie Gonzalez. With me today, fellow co-host Pete Charbonneau, and returning as we continue our conversation about John Carpenter's 1988 sci-fi action thriller, They Live, we have returning guest Joshua Pruett. A little bit about Josh. He's an Emmy-winning TV writer and author. He's worked on a number of different projects, including Mystery Science Theater, Phineas and Ferb, Last Comics on Earth. You can find him online at Zombie TARDIS. And this is our continued conversation about They Live. We all have an affinity for John Carpenter, for his films, and this film specifically because of its themes. In part one, we discuss how this film is essentially in a lot of ways a sledgehammer. John Carpenter really brings a lot of these themes to the forefront. And in part two, we'll continue talking about those themes if they still hold strong after the film's original release in 1988. Do those themes still make sense? Are they still relevant in the present day? And we'll also maybe do a little speculating on what a sequel, a remake, a reboot of what They Live would look like. All right, let's get back to John Carpenter's They Live.
Our masters!
What do these things want, and why are they here?
You still don't get it, do you, boy?
They have recruited the rich and the powerful.
They're running the whole show.
Wake up! They're all about you, all around you. Blinded us to the truth.
Take a look.
They are safe as long as they are not discovered.
I don't know what they are or where they came from, but we gotta stop them.
Stay away from me. Put these on. They have us. Look at them. They're everywhere. Our owners.
We have no other choice.
I don't like this one bit.
Leave it alone, man. It ain't none of my business, ain't none of yours.
We have been lulled into a trance.
Listen to what I'm saying to you. We're in trouble. The whole world's in trouble.
Control us.
You're sending some kind of signals out of TV sets.
I've got one that can see.
Mama don't like tattletale.
Now we start spilling some blood.
Let's go.
Push a button.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
One of the things I was going to point out how this movie has been studied, because I have a question for you guys. If you go down Podcast Alley in like YouTube watch list, there are so many different analyses of this movie, and a lot of them take on different perspectives, but here are just some of the many that I found, and I'm going to throw these out to you guys, right? Capitalism, greed. We had the release of Wall Street in 1987, so just a year before this, so greed is good. Yuppies, materialism, excess, corporate greed. We mentioned Robin Leach, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, how there's a little bit of that in all of this.
Don't miss a sizzling second of the all-new Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. Television's unchallenged authority on fame and fortune delivers big surprises, bigger stories, and the biggest names. Candid confessions from the stars of show business and big business, plus intimate tours of the world's most luxurious homes. Seeing is believing, so get ready to party hardy with all your favorite stars on the all-new Lifestyles.
Sunday night at 8 on Channel 9.
Reaganomics, classism, economic equality and inequality, disenfranchisement, religion, consumerism, marketing, exploitation, subliminal messaging, government control, indoctrination, anti-authoritarianism, living in ignorant bliss, conspiracy theorists, delusions, police militarization, resistance, and violence.
And that's just in the first 5 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. When I read some of these and I saw a few like 2 or 3 minute YouTube analysis, and I'm like, all the perspectives were correct. There wasn't any that I was like, oh, you had the wrong read. I'm like, no, you had the right read, or you had your read. But also, I think, and no disrespect to the folks whose like articles I read and whose YouTube videos I watch, I'm like, Yeah, I think Carpenter's also pitching softballs here, guys. All of these things are very much in the foreground of his mind and show up in the foreground of the movie. None of this stuff was very surprising. Anything from that surprising to you guys before I get to the question?
Yeah. No, I'm always surprised that people don't talk about how entertaining this movie is. Where they're very focused on the politics.
Yeah,
like you said, he softballs all of it because he's got to get to the fun stuff. But I always think that like this thing is so all around entertaining, and he gets every ounce of kind of joy out of this conceit that they're like all the cynicism is there too. But it's fun as heck. This is a romp, man. Yeah, it moves.
Yeah. So the question for you guys: does this movie for you guys, and Pete, you kind of already qualified it a little bit, where it kind of ranks in maybe your Carpenter Mount Rushmore, less from a Carpenter ranking and more from revisiting those themes. Do you think the movie is still socially relevant? Does it work? Is it too much of a softball? Is it too much of a sledgehammer in a world where we kind of now embrace subtlety because we allow for it, right? And in some ways, we kind of celebrate it because if it's not hitting you over the head and there's layers, but seeing it now with a lot more years on our lives, is it still work? Is it still socially relevant in the ways that maybe Carpenter was successful or unsuccessful back in 1988?
You want to take it, Josh?
Yeah, sure. I think you could make the argument that it's cartoony because of the broadness, like it undercuts too much of its message. But I would say in real life, like when we talked about Prince of Darkness, the point in that is not the characters. The point in that is the discussion and the questions and the theses. The intellectual questions in that are the point, right? So it's like in this, the point of it is the politics, right? So it's like he's leading with that. And I think you can make the argument that almost all of Carpenter's movies have that. His point of view, I think you could argue like all filmmakers hopefully have, his point of view is super present and upfront. That was his motivation for making this project. And it's like he's talked about kind of the Reagan era and just being like, what is happening? Like nobody seems to be paying attention. Everybody is focused on making money. Everyone's focused on this and that. Like, so that's all up front for him in this movie.
They Live was a movie I made towards the end of the 80s, and I was reflecting on a lot of the values that I saw around me at the time, mainly inspired by Ronald Reagan's conservative revolution. There was a great deal of obsession with greed and making a lot of money, and some of the values that I grew up with had been pushed aside. So I decided to scream out in the middle of the night and make a statement about that. And They Live is partially a political statement. It's partially a tract on the world that we live in today. And as a matter of fact, right now, it's even more true than it was then. We are manipulated by a lot of media around us. We are consumed by consumerism. And as you can see in the recent events in this country, they are still among us. They do live, indeed.
The sci-fi conceit of it still works so good, and I still get chills when the woman is walking toward camera and she's like, we've got one who can see.
You're okay. This one, real fucking ugly. Oh. You see, I take these glasses off, she looks like a regular person, doesn't she, huh? Put them back on, formaldehyde face. That's what we got.
That's enough out of you. You get out or I call the cops.
Call the cops? You know what you need? You need a Brazilian plastic surgeon.
I've got one that can see.
There's so much that I feel like you can still unpack about this movie. Because it was never subtle, that means it's never going to go out of style. That's what I would argue. Pete?
I think the theme still hit home today. I mean, we are currently living in, for all intents and purposes, a second Gilded Age. Like, wealth inequality has never been greater. He's got that on display on the screen. You've got the haves, the have-nots. You can see, it's like the age-old, like, you get the class above you to fight with the class below you, so the class on top is like kind of free and clear, and you kind of see that happening. The aliens are like, oh, hey, you get a taste of the good life. Like, we all know that that's only going to be temporary for these people, but everyone has their motivation for, like, the George Buck Flower character. Like, everyone's got their motivation. Like, well, this is my chance to get out of, living in a homeless encampment. So, you understand why some people make those decisions.
I thought you boys understood. It's business. That's all it is. You still don't get it, do you, boys? There ain't no countries anymore. No more good guys. They're running the whole show. They own everything, the whole goddamn planet. They can do whatever they want. What's wrong with having it good for a change? Now they're going to let us have it good if we just help them. They're going to leave us alone. Let us make some money. You can have a little taste of that good life, too. Now, I know you want it. Hell, everybody does.
You do it to your own kind.
What's the threat? We all sell out every day. Might as well be on the winning team.
I think the echoes are all still there. I mean, the satire that's in the movie, like that with the commercials, like, that Lee press on nail one where like the woman is like typing away with her nails and then like, stabs the piece of cheese. Like, tell me you wouldn't see that on a TikTok video today. Like,
today, yeah.
Yes, it's a sledgehammer, but these are universal observations that I think they're universal for a reason, because we can easily recognize them, and I don't think many of them have lost their import in the past 30-40 years since this movie came out.
We need Roddy now more than ever.
100%, yes.
What's your thought, Bernie?
The unfortunate universality, I guess, of some of these themes and how they're still prevalent today. And something that you had said when we talked about Halloween, Josh, and how through your thesis, uncovering how Carpenter was digging into some very primal, like lizard brain things in Halloween. And he also was doing that in this movie, but to do the whole, John Carpenter bingo when we were talking about Prince Darkness, a movie that Nick Dyack did not enjoy. Listen to that episode so you can hear his and
right under the Carpenter bus
thoughts.
Absolutely. Not always a love fest on Fan2Fan.
That's right. That's right. But you'd mentioned, Josh, how it felt. I think you'd mentioned like Prince of Darkness music video, the aesthetics, the pacing, the tone, because this is Carpenter being like, hey guys, I just made 8 movies throughout the 80s. Firestarter didn't work. I've covered like sci-fi, horror, a lot of camp, a lot of genre stuff. This is where I'm at now. It's 88. This is the movie I'm making. So to me, in some ways, this is a bit of a swan song for him in the 80s. Halloween in 78. And now boom, he makes all these other movies. This is him, I think, being like, I don't have time for a solo because I'm also angry. I'm angry.
10 years later, I'm pissed off. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's the him shaking his fist at the world, being frustrated, like you mentioned, Josh, how he said in interviews about Reagan and what's going on. And I think this is him being like, yeah, I don't have time for that. Like, no subtlety in this. You get this the way it is. I get a great collaborator in Piper who puts on screen what I need him to do, and a ton of great people like Keith David, Meg Foster, George Buck Flowers who do their part. This is what I'm doing. This is where I'm at now.
For sure.
One of the cool things and this may be on like one of the DVD audio tracks that Roddy Piper may have talked about, but I saw like him talking about, because he's Canadian, and like, the camaraderie that he and Carpenter had on this film, and like the mutual love, like, Carpenter, like you were saying, Josh, like, Roddy had his notebook full of phrases from wrestling, and that I think the bubblegum line was like one of them, and he's like, that's awesome, go with that, allowing him to ad lib. But I think he also, when the movie came out, they were hoping like Roddy would, obviously go do the promotion part of it. And he recalled saying like, I got my green card to be working in this country. He's like, I can't really go out like, espousing the director's views, which, Carpenter could be open and honest and upfront about, like, Reagan sucks. Reaganism is horrible, and capitalism's doom. Roddy Piper's like, I wasn't going to do that. I can't do that. This is where my bread and butter is being made. But he still had that mutual respect and the ability to work together and have that love, like, to kind of cross that divide where he's like, I kind of like what Reagan was doing, and so but I get it. I get where he was coming from, and I liked reading about the fact that they could have different points of view on that. Carpenter can be as outspoken as he is and was, and yet they still find the common ground.
Because I think that's one of the things that's interesting about it is like you have in that classic hero's journey, right? You have the reluctant hero, and I think one of the things that I think that makes this story so particularly strong is that Nobody really wants to do this. And I think that that's really what helps ground it and make that argument, is that he doesn't want to do it. And even when he sees the truth, it's almost impossible for him to convince other people. And so it's a really, I think, a good way to kind of show these perspectives on, yeah, but if you're comfortable, you know, it's a matrix, right? It's like, I'm eating this steak and I want to stay here.
Yeah.
And, you know, why do I want chaos and war? I don't. And most people don't, but there's this other thing going on. You can have multiple perspectives. So it's like Keith David's not wrong. Like he wants to put his head in the sand because that helps him provide for his. You can't really argue against that. You can say, hey, there's a greater good and there's things that we all have to do and there's times where we do have to fight. He's not wrong for wanting to do what he's doing. Well, what choice are you going to make? Are you going to stay in the matrix, or are you going to unplug and you know, try to be a part of the solution?
And if you unplug, you got to resist, and there's a cost to that.
There's a cost to that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, absolutely. You don't get to enjoy the steak anymore.
Speaking of costs, I was going to ask both of you, will you kind of get that 1-2 gut punch at the end where, you know, things are kind of building their, you know, they've got their mission. They're like, we got to get that signal on the TV station. And like, you're on the ride because now it's like this fast moving adventure running through. And then all of a sudden things take that nasty turn at the end because, you know, it's Carpenter and he's not going to give you the happy ending. So Meg Foster puts the gun to keep things temple. And then Roddy, you know, goes out with a blaze of glory, literally. But, you know, I remember, I guess, certainly as a kid, like I was always hoping like that because I liked them as characters. Keith David always had the admiration from Childs, from the thing. So I'm like, you know, just from that standpoint, I'm like, I want both these guys to make it because they just seem like good, hardworking guys and they don't want to be in this situation, but they're here. And so I hope they come through and, you know, and yes, they kind of saved the day at the end, but at the cost of their lives. And I don't know if you can remember what that felt like on the first watch, or like, you have any thoughts now about like, you know, that gut punch of an ending that we get?
There is a coldness that I think is perfection in casting Meg Foster because of her eyes, and not to diminish her to her eyes, but the way she killed Frank Armitage in that scene is done with no joy. It's a calculus that she does, and the way it's presented on screen, it's just like the way it's shot, it's just like it happens so quickly that it's like she's not like relishing in this. Oh, great, I get to kill these guys. No, now the ignorant of bliss is gone. If you've eaten, if you know the steak isn't real, this gets very weird for you. So you have to decide either you're going to eat the fake steak and be okay with it, ignorance of bliss, or you're going to fight. Then there's the other version where like you can stop fighting and this doesn't have to go any further. And I think that is her version, which is cold, but also why I think the ending that is, again, so dark and so perfectly Carpenter, like you were saying, Pete. This is the only ending he was ever going to give us. It maybe there's more of a gunfight because he's like, well, I want to do a little bit more of a Western here. Like this could be kind of fun, you know, going down the gauntlet of the hallways. This is what it's like now, right? Like we don't get to go through the Western town and have the final showdown. This is what the showdown looks like now in 1980s America. But
it was still the Western, and it's still the Western values because they saved the town.
Good point. Right? Yes,
so
yes.
They really. So it's both. I think that
he doesn't get to see the impact of his work, but he made the impact. Yes,
it's the tragic Western hero, right? Who's got the gut shot and who rides off on his horse, but the evil sheriff, is dead, and then the town are going to have to clean up, and they're going to have to deal with it. But he did the hard thing, right?
Good point.
So he put himself on the line, and now everyone is free.
The world needs a wake-up call. We're going to phone it in.
There's a thing about Carpenter where, you know, his cynicism is up front. The thing that I always find really interesting about him, and I think it's his character contrast, you know, his favorite genre is one of the most romantic or romanticized genres, like in the history of film. So I always think it's what I find interesting about his love for that is that there is a hope. There is a hope underneath it, but you got to dig to find it a little bit. But it's in all the movies. Like it's in everything he makes. But what's on top, right? The meal is the nihilism or the cynicism where he's like, I'm just being honest. But underneath is a vein of that romantic Western tradition, because that's what he grew up on. He loves it. There's still a 10-year-old John who like watched these movies and still believes in heroes. And like, that's what's so cool, is that in spite of all of the stuff that Nada goes through, he's still heroic. He still does it.
A few trivia pieces for you guys.
Yeah.
The most expensive scene to shoot was the grocery store scene, because they had to build the whole thing due to all the subliminal product labels. So they couldn't just take a grocery store off the shelf, no pun intended.
Yeah, you couldn't do that, right?
They had to make one. So of all the scenes,
cool.
That's the one. The European title for this movie, Invasion Los Angeles, which kind of betrays the movie because it kind of lets you know.
Oh, it says aliens, right?
There's an invasion in Los Angeles. So, I mean, I guess if you saw that on your shelf in France, you'd be like, oh, okay, well, I think I kind of have half an idea what this movie is about.
It is the weirdest title ever. I think it's of all his movies, it's the weirdest title.
Yes.
We didn't think they were dead. Like,
yes.
Like, what do you mean they live? Like,
well, it's also missing, like, it's like they live, we sleep.
Right.
Like, if you told me that was like, oh, you mean this is based on Philip K. Dick's They Live, We Sleep? It's like, oh,
yeah,
like
it's super confusing.
Do androids dream of electric sheep to Blade Runner? It's like you just took the one line.
Like, it's weird to me.
The last one here for trivia: Ray Nelson, who wrote the 8 o'clock in the morning short story, he also invented the propeller beanie hat. So just had to throw that out there.
What?
Yes, he invented the
wait a minute.
That's the kind of random trivia that I love.
Hold on.
I saw it, and Pete, it had your name all over it. I'm like, yeah, I'm copy and pasting this bad boy because I have to throw this one out there because there's someone, guys, who's done it.
What are your sources on this, Bernie? I mean, is this
the internet, as in all things? So
okay, all right, then I believe it.
Yes.
Okay, 100%.
Yes, I just know that.
So he is professed to have invented.
Oh, sorry.
That.
Josh, to be fair, the person who would have created the propeller hat would also be someone who would profess to creating it, because only someone that eccentric.
I did that.
Yes, he would also. I'm sure he also created a lot of things like hot water and snow. But
I did, and bread.
And bread, absolutely.
Not sliced bread, just bread.
That being said, Carpenter has had some of his movies remade. And not necessarily for the better, as unfortunately some remakes, tend to be. This would be a movie that I kind of set you guys up earlier to be like, is it still relevant? It feels like a movie that could be remade with a bit more subtlety. It could also be remade with like Stone Cold Steve Austin. Could work. It could work. But I could see someone taking a more nuanced perspective in remaking They Live in 2024. So would you want someone to tackle it? And if you do, how would you like it to be approached?
I think you could do a really interesting one with kids, and it's a younger perspective. You let this function the way that it is, and then you could do a similar story with kids, and it's like, this is what I believe, and my teacher's weird, right? You could do Invaders from Mars vibes. But I think the other thing, that a unique way that you could continue the story, because the protagonist is dead, you could do a really interesting TV show that exists in this world that is after this happens, because you don't have to recast anybody. Everyone's gone. It's not about that. It's that you could do more stories in this world. That's what I would be really interested in. I think you could do a thing where it's like there's pockets where people know and they've ousted them, and then there's pockets where people still don't know, which I think is interesting. I think you could also do a really interesting prequel. Like when they first got here, it's V, right? So it's like you could do things that are V or V adjacent.
Pete, what do you think?
Jumping into my head is something almost like Phantasm 2, where like you've got like someone roaming town to town. Okay, so LA, huge metropolitan city, but you would think the aliens might have been able to contain that to that city. And so to do it today, where you don't have that kind of pocket, like everything is more global, what's happened in the years in between, and like how did the aliens try to counter that incident in LA? And maybe there's like a group of, I like, Josh, your idea of like some younger characters that don't have the cynicism, so there may be humans that saw what happened in LA and were still okay with it. And so that ties back into that V analogy where there are people that knew about the aliens that were on board, but that even after their eyes were open, we're still kind of like, life's still not all that bad. That's cool. And so there's that conflict there too. And like, so you're not just, characters aren't just battling the aliens again. It's like, you got to battle the aliens and the humans that are really not all that bothered by these developments or having their eyes open. Like the eye opening was not the great victory that,
it wasn't the victory that we thought it would be.
Yeah.
And I mean, and the other thing that I think, because there's still so much to mine, we still don't really know what they want outside of subjugation. We know that they're all over the universe, and we see the transporter and stuff, which is a brilliant sequence. Outside of them just taking over, we don't know what the cost is. Like outside of being ruled. So there's still, I think, fun things to unpack. What about you, Bernie?
Well, let me start off with the. I don't want to see a remake at all, but in a world where existing IP has value, and somebody's going to remake this anyway. And I would respect John Carpenter's wishes where he's like, it doesn't matter. My movie's already on your shelf. So if they want to give me money to make that just means I get to buy more PlayStation games. But if that version was out there where somebody's like, hey, we're moving forward, I kind of want to see, and the references may vary for some folks, maybe even you guys, but I kind of want to see the Pontypool / Vast of Night version.
Oh, that'd be dope.
Of They Live. Pontypool, basically think very unique take on a zombie invasion as told through like the lens of a shock jock in a small town that's basically been ousted from like, just imagine if like someone that was a wannabe Howard Stern was kicked out of like a big city and now he's in a small city and things there's culture clash here. And then there was a full zombie invasion that you only really experience through people calling in. And through things happening. So close the lens. So maybe it is someone who's like, hey, I heard the signal as well. And maybe something happened, but again, super small. Or the Amazon Prime original movie, Vast of Night. Imagine if they made a movie of a young Rod Serling, like the guy who made Twilight Zone, and what his experience would have been like if he was like the kid who started the movie club in his high school. And then there was an alien encounter, but nothing sensational. You never see the aliens. You just know it's happening, and he's documenting it, and he's just being himself. He's being curious. It's like young Mulder's, the young Mulder mysteries, right? Like something like that. Mm-hmm. There'd be an interesting version. I want to see that, like a small town that maybe gets the shipment of the sunglasses by accident. All the people in the town who have it, but then maybe getting into like the paranoia. Body snatcher style where maybe some person has the glasses, but the glasses break. And then isn't this all kind of like a Twilight Zone thing where like now anyone could be an alien? Well, now we're just making guesses about the person who cut me off in traffic. So we're just leaning right back into like feral lizard brain type stuff with a small scope and still be in the world of They Live without necessarily taking advantage of the namesake of They Live. But
yeah, I think the world, I think we, all three of us, like, what's interesting is that, like, you don't need the remake, but going and visiting the world,
yes,
there's a lot there.
Yeah. But none of us are asking for like the Independence Day version of this, where it's like, and then, after this, the signal goes out and Will Smith comes in with, of course, Michael B. Jordan, and they team up and then they fight, everyone rallies together and they're like, yep, I worked with this construction guy named Nada. I think John may have been his first name. I don't know. But I saw that he died in a TV studio in California, and I'm going to fight. Yeah, that version is kind of the one that doesn't seem like we want to see.
He was my dad.
Woo. It's like a drug. Wearing these glasses makes you high, but, you come down hard.
Is this the first Carpenter movie to not use the Albertus font for the title? Because it goes in on the graffiti on the wall for the movie title.
Good call. I mean, even Prince of Darkness, because I think...
No, wait, The Thing does not have it.
There you go.
Okay.
The Thing has this approach.
Got it. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I have trivia too. Funny moment in the third act where, and it pulls me out of the movie every time, it bums me out. And it's one of these things, it's like, it's because I'm a movie geek. And I would wager that there's a lot of people who don't notice it. Most movie fans would notice it, but a lot of folks would just never notice it. the thing that Nada's one of the bad guys I think is using. There's a sensor. It's the PKE meter from Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
And it's like, and it's the most bizarre, right, Pete? Like it's the most, but it's so jarring. Why did they do that?
Yeah. And then they show it again, like a couple of frames later, and you're just like, again?
You guys. And it's like the Ghostbuster stuff is so beautifully art directed. It totally just belongs in that movie. We got this from the set of Ghostbusters 2, and you're like, oh, you guys.